And with us now is Alyssa Rafferty with the Adirondack chapter of the Nature Conservancy. Welcome, nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So is this a new way to try to help wildlife cross safely beneath highways?
It's new for us. It's new to New York State. So it's a really exciting new project for the Nature Conservancy and for our partners at the Department of Transportation. And first of all, I think we all recognize that roads are incredibly important to people. You know, we use them in our daily lives. It's what allow us to get from point A to point B. That said, there are some unintended consequences for wildlife that also come upon these roads in their daily lives, getting from point A to point B. And they can serve as real barriers, like you mentioned, you know, cutting off wildlife and posing safety concerns obviously for wildlife, but also for motorists who encounter these wildlife on the roads. So for the past several years, we've been working with our partners at DOT really to identify some shared objectives and collaborative solutions that we can take together to try to make roads safer for wildlife. So this particular project that's new for us, the Critter Shelf, is just one example of a real tangible, low-cost solution that we can really test out to see how effective it is.
And how does it get its name, Critter Shelf? This goes in the culvert. It's basically a steel mesh, a walkway that
right.
Wildlife can use.
Yep, exactly. So, and it's interesting that, you know, a lot of people don't often think about culverts, especially in the context of conservation. You know, these things are unseen. They're not often noticed unless there's a problem with them. They're underneath our roadways, and, you know, as you know, they're initially designed to pass water through them. So they were never designed with wildlife in mind, but it's becoming increasingly evident through, you know, to conservation organizations and transportation agencies around the world, really, that there's a lot of potential there for them to serve as, you know, safe passageways for animals to cross underneath the road rather than over it. So, you know, in a lot of these instances, we're looking at ways to make culverts as attractive as we can for wildlife, or more suitable for them. So for this particular site where we're putting in the shelf, the reason that it's needed, like you said, is because there's continuous water flow in the culvert year-round. And a lot of animals like bobcats and others just simply don't like to get their feet wet. So what this shelf will do, you know, it attaches right inside the culvert, and it provides a dry platform well above the water level for animals to travel through.
Safely getting them above the water level.
Exactly.
Do you think it'll work? Has it worked in other states?
Yeah, so this particular shelf was designed and developed in Montana at the request of Montana's Department of Transportation. You know, they were looking for similar outcomes here, and they worked with a researcher and a biologist at the University of Montana and a steel manufacturer to really test and design this, and it's been studied there for years, and it has worked there. And it's worked so well that it's just part of their standard practice now. In areas that meet their criteria, they install these shelves just on routine.
And it doesn't add a lot to the cost?
So really, this is a really low-cost solution. You know, replacing these culverts to make them more suitable for wildlife would be, you know, pretty expensive. So this, you know, having the opportunity to retrofit them, it's a really low-cost solution with, you know, a lot of leverage.
Is there evidence that wildlife are already using culverts, and that you're going to target areas where you know the wildlife may already be using the culvert?
Yeah, so we have been monitoring some culverts and are finding that a lot of them are getting used by wildlife. So it's, again, finding those opportunities where they're most important and what opportunities there are to make them more suitable for wildlife. So this particular site is located in the Black River Valley, which we consider to be one of our, what we call our linkage zones. So it really connects the core forests of the Adirondack Mountains to the core forests of the Tug Hill Plateau. So, and the Black River Valley, it's about 650,000 acres. It's different from those two core forested areas because it's more developed. It's really a patchwork of farms and forests, of open fields and communities. So it becomes really important for animals to try to navigate their way through there to connect to these two areas. And so several years ago, we started, to identify where in the Black River Valley should we focus, where is it most likely the animals will be moving. And so to do that, we used computer models that took into account forest cover, development, species habitat, preferences, things like that, that gave us kind of a wide area to focus to start. And then we took it to, on the ground field work. So in 2011, we conducted wildlife tracking surveys in the winter, so looking for animal prints in the snow along some roadways in the valley. And that taught us a lot about how the animals were moving around. And one of the things we learned, which really is no surprise, is that Route 12, where this structure will be placed, is by far the busiest road in the linkage. It cuts right through the linkage from north to south. So, that's the biggest barrier for wildlife in that valley. And so, we further identified this particular site by, having a conversation with our partners at DOT and saying, well, what steps could we take to make this road safer for wildlife? And as a starting point, we said, well, what culverts, what structures currently exist underneath the road that we could take advantage of as safe passageways? And this one really stood out in part because of its size. It's definitely large enough for wildlife, which is kind of the number one criteria, but also because there's good forest cover on either side that animals would feel comfortable approaching the road there. And really an added benefit to this site is that the land is already protected on one side of the culvert, and we have a good working relationship with the landowner there. So that's just an added benefit. We hear often from our transportation colleagues that when they're investing in a site like this that they're going to have to maintain, they don't want to be building bridges to nowhere, essentially, if should the land on the other side become developed several years down the road. So that we know we can safeguard against here.
And you think that this will continue to be a wildlife path that they're using?
Yeah, it's definitely the most forested area connecting the two regions, and I think it will be increasingly important with climate change. As habitats shift, species may be forced to shift with those habitats to find new home ranges, and so having protected forests where they can move to, but also move through, will be really critical.
We know that throughout the Adirondacks, larger culverts are being put in after Irene and some of the bigger storms we've seen in recent years. A lot of communities and the state are looking at putting in larger culverts that are better able to handle larger amounts of water and debris.
Yeah, so and that's to the benefit of fish and wildlife. So, and people, obviously. A lot of these smaller culverts are prone to flooding, and they can wash out roads and cut off communities. So finding opportunities where we can create these win-win scenarios is really what we're after.
And the Nature Conservancy is doing that in the Adirondacks, and closer
That's
to the
right.
Lake Placid area, where special culverts are being put in. And primarily the goal there is for the fish habitat, correct?
That's right, and it is very similar work. Who would think we'd be working so much with culverts? But it's a similar goal in both instances. So it's all about connecting habitat. So for fish, it's about making sure that the culvert isn't, blocking habitat. It's connecting the downstream habitat with the upstream habitat. And same for wildlife. It's allowing the opportunity to connect habitat on one side of the road with the other. With the fish passage work that we've been doing, a lot of these structures we're finding are too small to allow the streams to flow through naturally, cutting off essentially fish from getting upstream, which is something that brook trout in particular really need to be able to do, especially in the summer as water temperatures rise. They need to be able to migrate upstream into the cooler watersheds, the cooler waters. So it's amazing that replacing one small culvert can open up miles of stream for brook trout and other species.
And the first walkway is going in, you mentioned, for folks that may not be as familiar, on this side of the Adirondack Park. This is on the western part of the Adirondack Park. Route 12 runs from Utica up to Boonville, Lowville, and this is an area there along Route 12, which is a pretty heavily traveled road for that area.
That's right. So yeah, we consider that to be one of our linkage zones connecting the Adirondacks to Tug Hill. We're also working in another linkage zone connecting the Adirondacks to the Green Mountains of Vermont, so in the southern Lake Champlain area. And these are two, based out of the Adirondacks, these are the two linkages that we're involved in, but this is a much larger effort. It's all part of the Staying Connected initiative, which is an international collaboration between conservation organizations and government agencies across the entire northern forest, so from New York all the way to Maine and into Canada. So these are the linkages that we're working on. These are just 2 of 9 linkages that span the entire northern forest.
What type of wildlife do you think will use it?
So we think a lot of smaller wildlife will use it, based on what we've found from our colleagues in Montana. So we've been monitoring it with wildlife cameras for about a year now in advance of installation, and we will continue to monitor it after we install the shelf to see how effective it is at letting wildlife pass through. So far, we've seen a lot of the typical animals you would expect nearby. Lots of raccoon, coyote, fox, deer. Probably the most exciting thing we've seen so far is a bobcat right at the edge of the culvert where we will put the shelf. So we hope that that bobcat comes back and uses it. But those are the types of species that we do. I mean, obviously, any species that uses it is great if it's keeping them off the roads. But we're also really interested in the wider ranging mammals like bobcat, like fisher, like martin that we hope will use this shelf, because those are the species that really require long distances to travel. Large home ranges.
And is it a huge investment? Would you only be able to put a few of these in at a time, or is this eventually something that you think could be part of a lot of culvert projects?
Yeah, that's our goal. I mean, so this particular shelf structure is about $30,000, which may sound like a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things with transportation infrastructure upgrades, it's really, really just a fraction of the cost of what it would take to completely replace a culvert or do something more dramatic. So we're viewing it as a really great opportunity, low cost. And yeah, the goal is that eventually this will, become standard practice if it's effective like it has been in Montana, that this will just be routinely used.